Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to Yoga for Health and Resilience. Welcome to our 200-hour cohort who are just starting out in the 200-hour training. Welcome to the 300-hour cohort who is taking the Yoga for Health and Resilience 30-hour module where they study this protocol. And welcome to the community. This is our first time of really opening up this 10 series protocol that is intended for our training and expanding that intention as an offering for anyone to join. And our hope is that this is a very accessible service that is available to anyone. So if you enjoy this class and you know someone who would like to join, please spread the word. Welcome. So this is a 10-week series of 90-minute classes. It is offered through Yoga X, which is a special initiative in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences in the School of Medicine at Stanford University. This evidence-based protocol is designed by Dr. Christiane Brenz, who is clinical faculty and also the program director at Yoga X. My name is Gino Carvalho. I am the program manager, and it is my great pleasure and honor to guide you through this practice. Today, you may want to have a couple of yoga blocks. If you don't have yoga blocks, you could always use something like maybe a paper towel, a roll of paper towels, pots, maybe a laundry basket turned upside down, and a chair can be useful here. You might like to have a blanket or a bolster, anything that might help you kind of soften the floor and accommodate some of the contours and bends of the spine and extremities. So as you take a few moments to gather those things and keep them relatively close by, we'll begin to find a position, finding a shape for our opening centering. Perhaps for you, that's a chair. To sit on a couple yoga blocks. I'm sitting on a yoga block in a cross-legged position. Maybe you're best served by lying back on your back. But take a moment to choose the shape that serves you best and begin to settle in. Just take a moment to ground and stabilize. Beginning to make a decision about what you'd like to do with your hands. Perhaps grounding your hands down if you're in a seated position, or maybe turning your palms to face up as an offering, an opening. And take a moment to make a decision what you would like to do with your eyes. Perhaps just lowering your gaze. Or perhaps closing your eyes if that feels inviting to you. And as you begin to settle in, I invite you to check in with the body. And as you check in with your body, notice points of contact with the earth. And begin to consciously invite your body to ground, noticing how, if you're in a seated position, perhaps there are shifts in the pelvis that help facilitate that. Maybe it's a matter of becoming aware of your sits bones or your legs. Also inviting a sense of stability from your center. And sensing that physical agency of your core to stabilize. And then also inviting a sense of space upward. through the spine in that seated position, perhaps all the way up through the neck.
This meeting is being recorded.
Perhaps even noticing the very tip center of the crown.
You are muted.
Now, as we begin to ground and stabilize and expand upward, noticing the senses in the body, I invite you to check in with your breath. Notice the connection between the breath and the body. Maybe starting to notice how the breath moves the body. Perhaps in a very subtle way, but also perhaps in very tangible ways. And becoming very curious about that connection. Becoming very curious about the experience of the vitality in the breath. Possibly even noticing any effective tone. Noticing if something feels pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. Just noticing how that overlaps with the physical experience. And I invite you to check in with the mind, perhaps inviting the mind to join this experience of the connection between the body and the breath. Maybe even just making notes of some of the thoughts or emotions in this moment. But also being a little bit curious about how those might be expressed in the breath energy, or how those might be expressed in the physical body, in the physical experience. And as you become aware of this interaction between mind, breath, body, become aware of this capacity that you have to witness yourself. The experience of this inner observer, this amazing source of intuitive wisdom, the experience of witnessing the unfolding of experience, physical embodied experience, the vital experience of the breath, and the experience of the thoughts and emotions. And finally, I invite you to become aware of the experience of joy. Perhaps this experience of just the simple potential for joy, or the potential for peacefulness, the potential for restfulness, perhaps a sense of grounded joy or quiet joy. And from the awareness of all five of these experiences, the body, the vital breath, the mind, the witness, the sense of joy, I invite you to join in 3 rounds of breath as a community, honoring both your individual experience and the experience of the collective. Now, there's no need to synchronize these breaths. Let them be uniquely your own. But maybe at the end of your next exhale, you may begin your count And when you're done, if you're moved to do so, I invite you to bring your hands to heart center. I invite you to bow your head if you're moved to do so. And I invite you to consider an intention for our time together today. This may be an intention that you've already been working on, that you're continuing to explore. It could be a word, it could be a phrase, or it could be something that's transverbal or pre-verbal, just a sense, perhaps a sense of gratitude or presence, or perhaps holding a space for something that could come up later in our time together. Whenever that is, take a moment to inhale and breathe it in. And with your exhale, share it outward to our community. And I invite you to lower your hands if they were at your heart, and perhaps lifting your gaze if your eyes were closed. And once again, welcome everyone to our 10 series of Yoga for Health and Resilience. So this 10 series is an expression of integrated holistic yoga. This is designed to take us through all the aspects of our integration and our holism as individuals, but also collectively as a community. And together we'll journey through the exploration of yoga philosophy and yoga psychology. We'll explore our physiology and our embodied experience through these yoga frameworks. So today we'll start with the Koshas, which is translated to sheaths or layers of self. Layers of self, or perhaps we've also used the term layers of consciousness, but today I'll invite you to consider the translation or interpretation of the layers of experience. And there are 5 layers of experience that we've already explored in our opening centering. So the first layer is our physical layer, our physical body. And that's essentially all of our bones, our tissue, anything that has mass. It's also often translated or interpreted as our food layer. So I'm very much in the spirit of you are what you eat. And how we eat and how we move, it plays a huge role in how we nourish this layer of experience. And one of the ways that you can nourish yourself today is to essentially become your own guide and your own teacher. As we go through our practice today, I'll send suggestions and invitations out to you, but please feel empowered to make your own discerning choice about what shape, what variation you would like to do, in the manner that you would like to do it, in a breath cycle, a tempo, rhythm that is most auspicious to you. And take breaks and use props and honor whatever physical experience needs you have. The second layer that we have is our vital layer or our breath layer, which is very intimately connected to the body. We talked a little bit about that in the opening centering, and we might feel the nourishment from this experience in an inhale, but also in an exhale. When we let go of things, there's nourishment there. And there's an entire cycle of this taking place, bringing in resources, letting go of things, maybe waste, and being aware of that cycle is a way to nourish yourself. We also notice level of arousal in this layer of experience. So we might feel active or we might feel tired. We also notice our affective tone. So once again, we may feel pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And that sense of pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral is also very much linked to the mind, which is our next layer of experience. The mental layer or emotional layer of experience is connected to a more nuanced experience than just pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, but really some of the details that are in our thoughts and some of the opinions and stories and some of the emotions that are linked to this. And those three layers are essentially the most tangible of the five layers of the koshas. And when we get to our fourth layer, which is considered our wise and intuitive layer, and we talked about the first three being more tangible because this wise and intuitive layer kind of requires the ability to step back and observe, this ability to begin to cultivate perspective and the ability to put things into perspective and put things into context and make those connections, including the connection of ourself in relation to our communities, in relation to all of our interdependent relationships and our environment. There's also a beginning of observing things like the fluctuations of the mind, and being able to observe the affective tone, and being able to observe how we're nourishing our physical experience. And the final layer is the layer of joy, that experience of bliss. The more that we are able to access the wise and intuitive layer, the more we can start to settle into this grounded peacefulness, this sense of quiet joy, also considered maybe a seed of joy. This enthusiasm that comes from our seed of joy really extends beyond our own personal experience into the collective experience. And through that wise perspective, we can recognize our interconnectedness as a community. We recognize our interdependence, and we recognize that experience of co-regulation, and maybe even recognizing co-ascending. And we experience these relationships in a way that really provides meaning and fuels our sense of purpose. And we become drawn to communities and collective experiences that really honor a shared sense of purpose, that help to reinforce so much of these other experiences that we just talked about trying to address and navigate and cultivate a sense of equanimity in. And hopefully that by finding our collectives, finding our communities that provide that sense of purpose to us, we can amplify that seed of joy, not just for ourselves, but for our collective and for our community. So that's essentially our theme for our practice today as we work through the koshas. So thinking about listening as we make our way through the practice and notice what comes up in all five of those layers of experience. And for now, we'll transition into a little bit of a breath practice that will start our practice today. So for this, you can stay seated if you've been in a seat that you feel is auspicious for a breath practice. I've been sitting with my legs crossed, so I may just simply want to uncross my legs. Or maybe you feel like it would be better, you'll be better served to lay down in a supine position. And this could be a really nice thing, especially in the morning. If it's morning where you are. You may like to have a blanket that allows for the very top part of the thoracic where your scapula, the very top of your scapula and your head can rest with a slight bit of elevation. And if you're laying down on your back, you may like to have perhaps something to allow for your knees to bend slightly. That could be a bolster, that could be a rolled up blanket or towel. You could also bend your knees and let your knees fall inward and allow for the knees to rest on one another. So take a moment to find a very discerning choice for your position, for your opening breath practice, and begin to settle into that shape. Wherever you are, once again, begin to think about a very intentional position for maybe your hands. And begin to think of an intentional choice for what you may do with your eyes, perhaps just lowering your gaze, or if you feel comfortable doing so, maybe turning the gaze inward and closing the eyes. And once you're settled, I invite you to draw your attention to your breath. Just notice how the breath moves with the body. And if at any point you feel like you need to make an adjustment in your seat or your posture, just notice that there's an urge to make a change, a shift, a move, and then make a choice about how to address that urge and then act on that change and return to an invitation of stillness. As you bring your awareness to the breath, perhaps just starting to notice the journey of the breath. And maybe that starts with the nostrils. Noticing the brush of the breath against different types of tissue and being really curious about all of the respiratory apparatus everywhere the breath travels. And just allow the breath to simply flow in a natural way, allowing your inhale to just be exactly what it is. Allow your exhale to be exactly what it is without a need to augment or expand or contract. Just simply notice without any need to lengthen, shorten, or control the breath in any way. Just letting the natural cycle of the breath reveal itself. And really invite a sense of curiosity about that. Curiosity about that natural cycle of the breath. With a really open mind and an open heart. And then begin to bring awareness to your center right around your belly. Maybe noticing that area right around the low ribs, all the way down to the waist. And just notice how the breath moves through this region. There could be a sense of rising and falling. Maybe there's a sense of moving out and in. Maybe there's a 360-degree expansion and contraction. And begin to invite your awareness to the diaphragm, this interesting tissue that sits at the bottom of the rib basket, perhaps sensing a gentle contraction on the inhale the diaphragm contracting, and on the exhale, feeling the diaphragm release. And tune into this natural movement, this natural rhythm without any need to change it. Simply maintain that curiosity of the dance between the body and the breath. And in that dance between the body and the breath, just invite the mind to join. Without any story of what's happening, just inviting the mind to be a part of the curiosity and exploration of this experience. Trusting the deeper wisdom of the natural flow of breath. The natural flow that might inspire a little sense of awe, maybe a little sense of joy, and perhaps a little sense of gratitude. Take a few more rounds of breath to continue to cultivate that awareness and curiosity on your own. And at the end of your next cycle of breath, I invite you to begin to make your way back to a seated shape. If you took some time to lay back, take as much time as you need to in the next 30 seconds or so to make your way back to a seated shape. And you could come back to a chair or perhaps the yoga block, maybe even returning to the cross-legged position, but I'll invite you to consider this hero shape, which is to sit back on the knees, sitting on the shins. I'll again enjoy a block here, at maybe even 2 blocks. And sometimes there are anatomical shapes in the ankle that don't really accommodate this flat angle at the ankle. So having a little bit of, say, maybe a rolled up towel or something that allows for the shin to elevate, something soft against the shin that lifts it a little bit, that allows for a little bit of a flex in the foot, a little bit of a flex in the ankle, can be something nice that allows you to take that shape. Maybe it's 2 yoga blocks, maybe a chair. But take a moment to choose a shape that serves you best and begin to settle into that shape. And begin to ground through whatever shape you've chosen, feeling the sense of the contact with the earth. And notice your pelvis. And take a moment to connect that grounding with the earth to the position of the pelvis, knowing that the spine comes up out of that pelvis, and we're looking to provide a little bit of stability to the spine through the center. Maybe noticing if there are any auspicious shifts that can be made to make this seat a little more comfortable. And once again, just checking in, noticing if you want to make a shift, taking into consideration how to shift, and then acting on that choice. And when you're ready, once again, bring your awareness to the breath and invite a little bit of movement in the scapula. So just allow the shoulders to rise and fall and see if you can recall some of the sensations, some of the work and awareness that we did in the diaphragm, and just let that be connected to the movements of the shoulder. You can move both shoulders bilaterally. It may encourage your neck to also move. You'll notice that as you're moving your shoulders, you're probably also engaging the thoracic spine in some movement and perhaps even a little bit of undulation through the spine. You can move one shoulder at a time if that feels auspicious for you. I'm continuing to kind of move in a backward rotation. You can always change the direction of that shape, but just take some time to warm the scapula, noticing how the physical body feels, noticing how the vital experience plays out and the breath connects to the shoulder rolls, and then noticing if the mind has any opinions about this without getting caught up in those thoughts, without getting caught up in that story, but also without chasing it away. And then once your shoulders feel like they're warmed up, just allow the shoulders to sit in what might be perceived as kind of a neutral position for the arms, for the shoulders to hang. And I'll invite you to let the arms rest at your side. And with an inhale, begin to expand the arms upward and outward in this kind of sun breath. And then as the hands meet up top, perhaps inviting an exhale on the way down. I'm inviting a nice, slow and deliberate movement, but you do not need to synchronize with my movement. Make sure that this movement is uniquely your own, and perhaps if you are syncing it with your breath, just allow for that rhythm of the movement to be something that serves you individually, physically, vitally. You might notice if it feels auspicious that closing your eyes can allow you to perhaps turn the gaze inward. Physically, perhaps noticing this rhythm between the arm and the scapula. Noticing that rhythm between the scapula and the thoracic spine, that upper part of your spine connected to the lumbar through your core. And continuing this little theme that we've invited in the physical experience of grounding, stabilizing, and expanding. If it helps, perhaps just thinking about that spot at the very center of the tip of the crown of the skull and inviting a little bit of extension there. Now that we've started to ground, now that we've started to become more familiar of how to stabilize, and maybe invited expansion in a couple different directions. Once you complete your next exhale, just take one more breath cycle. And let your hands rest either at your sides or perhaps at your thighs, wherever is auspicious for you based on the seat that you've chosen. And just take a moment to check in and notice any effect of that subtle arm and breath movement. On the next inhale, I invite you to bring the arms up one more time, and this time perhaps clasping the right wrist with the left hand, and then maybe making a little bit of a side bend to the left. So I'm not mirroring you, I'm moving to my left. And then perhaps coming back through to the center and switching that clasp and moving to the other side. This could be something that, again, gets synchronized with a breath rhythm that feels auspicious for you, but it might also be something that you decide to stay in for a little while. So you may take this side shape and take a few breath cycles. Try to avoid any over efforting or over extension. We can also end up maybe bringing the arm around and close off this area. See if you can invite a sense of openness in the heart and maybe allow for that move to be just subtle enough and still invite some of the breath to help connect that connection. And then invite the mind to join. Notice if there's a little story about this. We don't always move laterally in life. So it could be really foreign to think about this real side bend of the spine, right? And if we move the arms in some ways, we can kind of trick ourselves into thinking that we're side bending when we're not necessarily side bending. You can also do this without the arms if that's helpful. You can take your hands to your heart. You can also take your hands down and just use one arm. And wherever you are, take one more cycle on each side. And then come back to the center. And once again, just take a moment to check in. Grounding and stabilizing, expanding, noticing the breath, noticing if the mind has a certain opinion or story, anything that's coming up. Maybe starting to notice if you're wise observer and the deeper level of intuition could be having a little bit more presence in what we're cultivating today. We'll have one more movement while we are in this shape, and that is to invite a rotation. So we'll do the same invitation to reach the arms up. And on the exhale, coming into a turn and a twist that allows for whatever movement through the pelvis helps to facilitate this rotation. So definitely not anchoring your pelvis down, not trying to force this rotation into the lumbar. It really should be happening throughout the whole spine, including this kind of shift in the pelvis. So as I turn to the right, my left hip can come forward, and then a lot of rotation happens up the spine, maybe a little bit more the more you travel up. So take a moment to perhaps modulate that range of motion and notice if there's a synchronization with the breath that's most auspicious for you. Perhaps it's the inhale and exhale. Perhaps, once again, you may choose to stay in one of these rotations for a moment to notice the ebb and flow of the breath while you're in the twist. And just if you stay in that still space for a while, just notice what comes up physically, vitally, noticing if the mind has a little story there. And once you complete your next rotation, take a moment to come back to center, making sure you feel balanced on both sides. And one more time from your seated position, just take a moment to check in, noticing any effect that has come up, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. Noticing if the mind has any story about our journey so far this morning. Just noticing it without getting caught up, not having to chase it away. Perhaps even bringing your awareness back to the intention you set at the beginning of class. And when you're ready, we will move to a few standing postures. So take a moment to adjust from your seat, maybe moving your blocks out of the way. Make your way to the top of your mat. Taking a moment to clear aside any props that were serving you and some of those other postures. And for the standing shapes, just make sure you have 2 yoga blocks for perhaps the front of the mat. I might do the demonstration at the back of the mat. You could also use your roll of paper towels for this. I think the camera is a little bit better if I'm at the back of the mat. You can pick whatever makes most sense for you. We'll take a moment to begin to ground in our standing shape. So consider your footprint. The footprint starts the base of support. And if we have a very small footprint where the feet are tighter together, it's a smaller base, and it actually makes equilibrium a little bit more of a challenge. Perhaps that's an intentional choice on your part. A wider base tends to provide a little bit easier access to equilibrium because you can get your center of gravity to be over your base and keep it there. So take a moment to notice if it's hips distance apart, shoulders distance apart, what will serve you best. And once you begin to settle into your footprint, bring your awareness to the sole of the foot and the toes. Take a moment to pick your toes up, spread the toes wide, and place the toes back down on the mat. Do that again, picking the toes up, spreading the toes, and then maybe even having an intentional sequence of placing, maybe it's the pinky toe down, then the ring toe, the middle toe, the index toe, the big toe. You might be doing it with your fingers like I am as well. I think it helps demonstrate what I'm trying to do if you can't see my toes. Nothing wrong with that. As you start to notice how these sensations come from our center, and there's a really interesting dynamic that plays out between that sensory perception through all 4 of our limbs. And then the next time you ground your toes, just take a moment to lean forward just a little bit. So you just barely break your vertical plumb line, and then just a little bit, maybe leaning back slightly. And maybe that's more of bumping your butt back, bumping the hips back slightly. And then one more time, lean forward and lean back, and it's very subtle lean, finding that forward and back orientation, and maybe that helps to find a good plumb line. The next time you lean back with a little bump of your butt, it might feel like you're reaching your hips back behind your heels. Invite an extension upward with your hands and begin to reach vertically, grounding down through the feet and reaching upward through the arms. And as you reach up through the arms, feel the toes, the blade of the foot, the arch, the heel. Feel all the rooting energy through the feet, grounding downward from the pelvis, the inner thigh, the low leg, the quadriceps, maybe lifting your kneecaps to feel a little bit more engagement in the lower extremities. Grounding and then stabilizing in the center. Notice the breath, notice the movement of the diaphragm up and down, and all of the energy and vitality that is occurring there, perhaps subtly or maybe very tangibly. And begin to invite perhaps a little bit more extension upward, grounding, stabilizing, and expanding. And then perhaps pressing the toes down and maybe even lifting your heels up. And if you played with reaching the toes up, maybe gently bringing your toes, your heels back down. Sorry, so lifting the heels up and the toes down. Apologies. All right, so we'll play with that a little bit more. And if you do have wall space, it could be nice if you're playing with balance on the toes. But take a few more of those extensions upward with the arm. So you ground down. Maybe there's a little bit of a bump back in the butt. You can feel the grounding through the heel. The toes get light, and then ground through the toes. Reach up and extend up and find that plumb line and continue the extension upward and allow for that toe raise to take place. So the heel stays down, you're pressing the toes downward. So you're pressing the toes down, lifting the heels up, you're on your tiptoes and reaching up. And then maybe coming back down, maybe having just that little bit of a bump back. It's still a check-in for the plumb line, that vertical extension, and then rising up one more time. Pressing the feet down. Notice if that footprint tight or wide helps with that. And then gently allowing for the feet to settle. And one more time, come back to your standing Tadasana shape, or maybe it's an anatomic position where you're grounding the feet. Perhaps it's hips distance apart. Consider your footprint. Let your hands hang at your sides in a neutral position. Consider the very center of the tip of the crown of the head expanding upward, and just check in, noticing any sensations. And from there, we'll extend up one more time, inhaling to reach up. And this time, when you come down, we'll play with a deeper hinge. You can take your hands to your hip crease and allow for the hips to bump back a little bit further. And then maybe the hands come to the yoga blocks at the top of the mat, or the pots or paper towels or whatever other prop is serving you here. Now, one of the things that could be interesting if you do have the wall space to play with this is you can feel this hinge take place when the tailbone essentially kind of rises up the wall. So we'll play with this hip hinge a couple times. Inhaling with a reverse swan dive, perhaps, and coming up. And then exhaling and letting that hip hinge, you can take your hands to the crease of the hip, maybe a little bit of a bend in the knee. And if your hips are against the wall, you'll feel how the tailbone, the sits bones even rise up the wall a little bit. So take that rotation, that hip hinge a couple times on your own. If you're able to see on my screen, I'll just give you a little demonstration of how that rise in the sits bones and the tailbone kind of occurs in this hinge. So you can see that the back is staying straight through this movement. All of the points of contact with the dowel are staying there. Back of the head, tailbone, middle thoracic, and the back part of the bottom part of the spine is actually elevating up, and that is the hinge in the hips. So just taking a few of those hip hinges and feeling it happening with the strength of the core. So allow yourself to come to this half lift after playing with that hinge, so that you really can feel that the hips are the hinge and the spine is supported by the strength of your core, in addition to that strength of stabilizing through the lower extremities. And you could stay here in this position, feeling this stability, and if it feels okay, you can start to allow yourself to fold a little bit deeper. And this is where you will start to have some movement through your spine. Just doing that with a really intentional commitment to the movement. So you can continue moving blocks so that you have some stability, perhaps even coming to the floor, or if it feels comfortable for you, you could even do a little bit of this ragdoll, maybe grabbing opposite elbows. And if it feels okay to add a little bit of movement, maybe there's a little bit of a sway there. Pick the variation that works best for you as you play with this hinge. After taking a few breaths in your hinge, we're going to continue with the blocks, but we're going to take one block and place it between the shins. and start to find your footprint. You can still use this other block as a base to help you stabilize in front. But once you have the block between your shins, begin to bend your knees and send your hips down and come into a nice deep squat. And from this squat position, squeezing the block, ground through your base, provide as much stability and strength in the legs, and then maybe invite a little bit of movement with the arms. So you can always keep your hands on the block, chair, whatever makes sense for you, or you can continue with this little bit of a chair kriya, this little bit of like a skier's movement. It'll start to generate a lot more in the lower extremities. And when you're ready, perhaps reaching and then maybe even reaching the arms all the way up. And grounding through the footprint, seating down through the hips, maybe even opening the heart. And in this awkward shape, perhaps as we check in through all those layers, maybe still being able to find that seed of joy. Maybe that still comes with a little bit of a smile. When you're ready, perhaps coming into that half hinge, the half fold, to take a little bit of a break. Take breaks whenever you need to. I'll invite you to play with that chair pose one more time. You can put the block between the shins, you could remove the block, or you could also try the block between the inner thighs. It's a little bit higher, and maybe you can feel those adductor muscles. So once again, perhaps playing with grounding through the footprint, reaching the hips back, bending the knees forward, so you have this accordion bend that still honors the plumb line, and maybe a sweep with the arms. And maybe playing with a little bit of a hold in this chair. And after checking in with all of our layers of this experience, come out of that shape however it serves you. And take a moment to check in. Coming back to that standing shape, Tadasana, the mountain pose, grounding through the footprint. If it feels comfortable to do so, maybe closing the eyes. Notice any change in the body, heat, warmth, malleability, strength. Notice the breath, maybe the heart rate. Notice if the mind has a story. Notice if your deeper wisdom and the observer is able to join this experience. And after a few moments there, we'll take a stance at the top of your mat, if you're not already there. And with a grounding kind of bounce, so you just get a recall of all that work you've done to establish your center of gravity, establish that plumb line. You're going to take the left foot and step it back in a nice long lunged shape. And go ahead and turn to the left a little bit as you take that step back. And play with this footprint to find the most auspicious alignment and grounding for the lower extremities. So what is that? It's what allows for the pelvis to be free, right? So sometimes you get into this kind of open hip warrior two shape, and there's instruction to really open your hips or square them laterally or something else. Allow your hips to find their most natural grounded shape that allows your pelvis to be free, supported by the legs, that allows for the pelvis to facilitate the extension up through the spine, stabilizing, and begin to play with that feeling of the toes that help to cultivate that grounding sensation. There may be an interest in making sure that the femur is pointed in the same direction as the middle of the foot. So if it's really folded in or out for some reason, just take a moment to try to ground through that front leg and provide support through that back leg. So you don't have to turn that toe all the way in or out. Find that angle that works best for your pelvis. We all have a really unique shape of how the femur comes into the pelvis. And after you find that, perhaps in addition to expanding upward, I invite you to find some expansion outward. Maybe coming back into some of those shoulder rolls as we ground down and reach out. Taking any little nuance of this warrior two shape. And then maybe taking a moment to find a little bit of stillness and steady the gaze in a space that feels good for you. I happen to be choosing to look just beyond my fingertips in front of me. Noticing the experience of the physical body, noticing the vital affective tone. Does this feel pleasant? Unpleasant? Neutral? From here, invite a maintenance of your lunge. You can always straighten this leg whenever you need a break, maybe coming back into it whenever it serves you. Take a peaceful warrior, reaching up through the right side body, from the pelvis through the obliques and the lats, reaching the arm up, and then maybe even complementing it with a downward movement. There's no need to overextend in this shape. Think about, again, finding that plumb line, grounding, stabilizing, and expanding. And after a breath or two, I invite you to cartwheel downward and begin to find the floor or a block or your laundry basket or whatever supports you have. You may adjust that back leg if that feels good, and begin to bow into a humble warrior shape. You might continue to feel this grounding in the front leg and a bend in the knee and a little bit of bump back in the bum just to keep the spine extended. You can take your hands to blocks at any height that serves you, maybe even grounding the hands to the floor, or maybe floating the arms. You can reach the hands back behind and interlace, or perhaps if you have a towel, that might feel like a nice offering, coming into this humble, peaceful warrior shape. Whichever shape serves you. So just taking whatever shape, whatever supports, noticing if there's any mind story here. Just take a moment to invite the mind to steady and invite your intuitive self to help you make a discerning choice. And after your next breath cycle, I invite you to, if you haven't been using a block, perhaps taking a block to the outside of the right foot and beginning to perhaps extend this leg if you haven't done that already. Or you could keep it bent into a lunge shape, but I'll invite you to somewhat straighten this leg and begin to open the heart into this triangle-like shape through the legs. You can, again, move the leg if you'd like, find your base, find a support that's very accommodating for whatever grounding we would like here, but begin to move the torso before we do any type of arm extension. So there's a sequence here, right? We ground, we free the pelvis, we stabilize to the core, and then as long as that is supporting this thoracic move, then perhaps the scapula has a place to allow for the arm to maybe express some type of extension. Grounding, stabilizing, and expanding. You can also do this with a bent knee in this lunge shape. And from wherever you are, after the next breath cycle, go ahead and ground through the footprint and maybe swing the left arm up to come out of this shape. You can either hop your legs to the center or heel toe. And take your time to come back to this centered position, coming to Tadasana, mountain pose. As you ground your footprint, relax the arms, take a moment to check in. Noticing all those layers of experience. We'll do the same thing on the other side. So from wherever you are, you can stay where you are. I'm just switching sides so you can see me and I can see you. And we'll take a little bit of that bounce, which just gets us acclimated to the energy and the leverage. And then when you're ready, stepping back and feeling that natural expansion of that length, you can always adjust this footprint if you'd like. Begin to ground through the front leg, this left leg on this side. And ground through both legs in a way that allows the pelvis to be free. And that doesn't mean to pin something open and rotate in any way that doesn't feel natural. If that right hip wants to be forward a little bit, let it. And just notice that one side might feel really different from the other. Grounding through all four corners of the front foot, or maybe it feels like a triangle. Grounding down through the back leg. Free the pelvis, stabilize the center, beginning to expand up and also maybe out. Grounding down, taking a few moments in this shape, warrior two. Noticing if any stories are coming up on your next inhale, reaching up through the vertical line and finding this peaceful warrior. Staying grounded through the footprint. On your next breath cycle, I invite you to come into the bowed shape of the humble warrior, taking the hands to blocks, taking the hands to the floor, adjusting the footprint in any way that helps make you feel strong and stable underneath and frees the pelvis, that stabilizes the center, and any arm position that unfolds after that sequencing that may be happening in a very intuitive way for you without my needing to over cue that. So definitely noticing if there is an intuitive, deeper wisdom that's telling you and guiding you through these shapes. Listen to that. And then when you're ready, taking that block just outside of the left foot and beginning to straighten the front knee if it's not already straightened. So this is an option. You can always keep it in the lunge shape. You can come into a little bit more straightened knee. I never really straightened that knee all the way. But coming into this triangle shape, feeling the engagement of both legs that allows for the pelvis to be free. So that doesn't mean that this right hip has to reach up, definitely not between two panes of glass. Allow for this rotation and lateral orientation to be exactly what it is in your body, and start to invite the opening of the heart. And not over rotating through the heart, but just opening enough. Grounding and stabilizing and allowing for the scapula to sit on the thoracic before extending the arm. If extending the arm. Nothing wrong with just keeping the arm here. And after playing with this triangle shape, you can always take a break, bending the knee, straightening the knee. They're both challenging. Perhaps coming out with a swing through the arm, ground through the legs, coming back through. And one more time, we'll find ourselves in the center in our Tadasana shape. Take a moment to check in with all the layers. I invite you to close your eyes if you're comfortable closing your eyes. And just notice the effect of that standing posture sequence. Notice the shift that's occurred since your check-in. Maybe the heart has started to slow. Maybe the respiratory rate has started to slow. Maybe the mind story has started to change. Maybe there's a little more joy or different. I invite you to check in with your stance for a moment and perhaps invite a little bit wider stance. And we're slowly going to lower down onto the floor. So you can take this descent in any way that's auspicious for you, but with a slightly wider footprint. You can always extend the arms to add a little bit of displacing the center of gravity, maybe looking to find the floor with the bum. At any point, if you'd like to, just go ahead and sit back, but maybe playing with the idea of looking for the floor and then maybe finding a little bit of a touchdown and letting the legs get light. You can always take your hands behind you, but maybe continuing to find that leverage. Maybe it's just a gentle handprint as you begin to roll down one vertebra at a time, playing with this engagement through the core and finding a soft landing on your mat. And once you get there, take a moment to let your head rest. Maybe keeping your knees bent. Or maybe starting to find some permission to extend the legs long. And finally, from this supine position, once again, check in with a sense of grounding through the physical body, the physical experience. Notice the vital self and the respiratory rate. And that experience of the breath. Notice if there is a story. And check in with that inner observer that's been guiding you with curiosity and wisdom. And from this supine position, I invite you to bend your knees if they're not already bent, placing the feet on the floor, and just allow for a little bit of width between the feet. And from this shape, you can take a few windshield wipers, allowing the knees to fall or lower to one side. And this can be done in a kinetic way from side to side, maybe with the breath. And it can also be done in a more static shape, letting your legs fall to one side and staying there. You may even want to have a little bit of a prop or a bolster for one side if that feels nice. But beginning to sense this permission to release through this grounding, coming into this shape on the back and noticing so much more points of contact with the earth, allowing the earth to hold you. letting these movements through the legs that we just asked to hold us in so many challenging ways, letting this movement be something that invites a little sense of release. If you've been staying on one side for a while, perhaps taking a moment to go to the other side. Noticing how one side might feel really different from the other. And letting that be exactly as it is without needing to fix it. And as you lay here on your back, inviting the sense of grounding and release, invite any other movement that feels auspicious for you. Perhaps it's bringing the knees towards the belly, towards the chest. Maybe it's a happy baby pose where you're bringing the knees towards the chest or armpits, if that's available, maybe even grabbing onto ankles or feet. Or maybe it's just one knee at a time. One knee coming into the belly or chest, or just gently reaching toward the back of the thigh with a towel wrapped around the thigh or a strap. But no need to over effort here at all in this cool down that is starting to become less and less effort, less and less work, more release, more surrender. And if you're in that happy baby or knee tuck position, if it feels nice to perhaps rock from side to side a few times, I invite you to do so. Any other move that will feel like it makes your practice this morning feel complete. Take a few more breaths as you explore that shape and begin to make your way to your final resting shape. So once again, considering how you might soften the floor beneath your shoulders, or maybe allow for a little support behind the knee. If it's chilly in the room, perhaps a blanket to cover. Take a moment to notice your needs, making a decision of how to tend to them, and then acting on that. And once you find your shape and find that support, begin to settle in. Once again, consider what you might do with your arms. Consider what you might do with your eyes, perhaps closing your eyes or just lowering your eyelids. And if this is the second time you've lied down on this supine position, just notice if there's any change, any shift that's occurred. Any change that's occurred physically or in your vital experience, in the mind, or intuitively. And invite yourself to release and let go. One more time, check into the physical experience of the body and invite your body to start to surrender to the earth. Invite a sense of grounding, perhaps inviting a sense of heaviness or weight. Allow your body to become heavy. Tuning into this sense of grounding and surrender. And as the body starts to surrender and ground into the earth, gently tune into the breath and invite the breath to become soft. And just notice the gentle ebb and flow. The moment, the movements of the energy of the breath. Allow them to surrender into this moment, guided by the sense of grounding in the body, grounding the breath. And as both of them begin to surrender, briefly check in with the mind, acknowledging whatever is present without any need to block it out or chase it away, but also not getting caught up in it or chasing after it. Letting go of any need to pursue any thought or emotion, and beginning to surrender the mind, the thoughts, and the emotions to your deeper intuitive wisdom. Grounding in the trust of your inner wisdom, grounding in the trust of that seed of joy within this collective. And I invite you to bring your attention one more time to the low belly and gently tune in to this part of your belly, noticing if there's any effective tone, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, not with any desire to change it, but just with a sense of caring curiosity, tending to this part of you, perhaps sending some energy, sending some compassion, or maybe it's just a sense of gratitude, respect, appreciation, admiration. Holding that sense, I invite you to bring your attention to your navel, solar plexus, just upwards slightly to the center of your core, center, core of your being. And just explore what's present there. And as experience emerges, just tend to those sensations. Maybe sending loving kindness, sending gratitude, and holding that space, invite your attention to your heart center, the area of the lungs and the heart, the area of vitality and tenderness. And as experience emerges there, tend to any sensations that come up. Holding that space, I invite your attention to your throat area, where the neck meets the skull. This vulnerable but also vibrant place, where wind meets sound. And as experience emerges, tend to sensations, sending gratitude, sending compassion, appreciation. Invite your attention to the very center of the tip of the crown of the head. This area that is not always easy to locate, can be somewhat elusive. Take a moment to be really curious.
You'll need to
about
unlock your iPhone first.
Be really curious about what comes up, what sensations come up there. And tend to them as they emerge. And then bring your attention to your face and all of the facial features. The jaw, the brows, the nose, this very public facing feature. Just notice any experience that emerges here. Take a moment to tend to that, sending it energy. Take a moment to bring your attention to your upper and lower extremities. These limbs that carry us through life and hold us. Notice any emotions or any sensations that emerge, and take a moment to tend to them. And then invite your attention to the entirety of your body. Your physical body, your vital body, your quiet mind, your deeper intuition, and your potential for joy. And from this place of integration, I invite you into 2 minutes of silence. You'll hear my voice to take you out of that 2 minutes of silence. Gently becoming aware of my voice. Also become aware of the sounds around you. Begin to take in the senses of the outer world, the ground beneath you, the clothing on your skin, the air against your face. Invite the body to engage in this moment in any way that feels auspicious for you, perhaps wiggling the toes or the fingers or extending the limbs and finding a stretch. Invite any wiggle or embrace or any sense of vitality. And take a very conscious breath, noticing your inhale as you breathe in and your exhale as you breathe out. And in the next 30 seconds or so, take all the time you need to come back to a seated position. Coming back to your seated position, begin to settle in, grounding. And from your seat, I invite you to take your hands to your heart if it feels appropriate to do so, perhaps bowing your head, and invite you to close your eyes and bring the gaze inward if that feels auspicious for you. And just take a moment to notice if there's anything that you'd like to take with you from this practice today. Maybe noticing if you'd like to bring your awareness back to the intention you set at the beginning of class. Wherever you are, whatever that is. With an inhale, breathe it in. And with an exhale, send it out. I invite you to lower your hands and lift your gaze if your eyes were closed. Thank you, everyone, for sharing your practice with me this morning. It was a pleasure and an honor. 300-hour students, I believe you have a link for debrief. And for the 200 hours, we'll stay here on this call. But first, we'll take a 10-minute bio break and meet back here. We'll meet back here in 10 minutes for a small group debrief. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks so much. The 300s, you can find the link in your Google Classroom for the Health and Resilience module, and I look forward to seeing you in just 10 minutes or so.